spoilers for the whole game. Also, to get my stance on the discourse out of the way, it doesn't upset me that the playable protagonists are female, that Ellie's lesbian, that Abby's yoked, or that Lev is trans. I think that people who declare that the inclusion of these characters is indicative of some kind of agenda are generally coming up with reasons to obscure the fact that they don't want female or minority characters in a game. I do, however, feel that Naughty Dog's work culture and the industry-wide practice of crunch are unacceptable. The Last of Us 2 has some very mixed reviews. Some people felt the themes are a little too obvious and lacking depth, while it does too little to reinforce its points through gameplay. I think, though, a lot of the perspectives that pose its flaws as wholly irredeemable are from people who are maybe affected by the hype train and consequently raise the bar for a passing score. I suppose that's fair in contrast to the ridiculously uncritical reviews from mainstream games journalism. It's just that my personal experience with the game had me feeling let down with its execution, but at the same time impressed that they stuck to the story they wanted to tell. It wasn't as fully realized as I wanted, nor did it have me liking anything the primary protagonist does, yet I was still very consumed by what they gave me. Let me back up and summarize the game. The Last of Us Part 2 is the long-awaited sequel to the massively acclaimed game from 2013. It takes place 4 years later, after Ellie and Joel have settled into the thriving city of Jackson. After some former Fireflies track down and murder Joel as Ellie is forced to watch, Ellie decides to track down the perpetrators and get revenge. So, following Joel's brother Tommy, and with the support of her partner Dina, Ellie sets out to find Abby, a member of a Seattle-based faction called the WLF, and bring her to what she believes is justice. Just as it seems the game is about to reach its climax, it shifts perspective to Abby, the daughter of the neurosurgeon Joel killed at the end of the first game. Despite having enacted her revenge on Joel, she's still tortured, angry, and miserable. When her childhood ex-boyfriend and still on and off again lover, Owen, goes AWOL, Abby sneaks away to find him. Along the way, she becomes disillusioned with her place in the war the WLF wages and reckons with the guilt she carries from a lifetime of violence, eventually meeting a fugitive pair from the enemy faction and deciding to help them escape. When Abby and Ellie's stories converge, Ellie loses the fight, and Abby lets her live once again. However, months later, Ellie, still unable to move on, leaves a life with Dina to pursue Abby once more, only to finally realize that killing Abby won't help her. This game goes all in on a dark story. Ellie's dogmatic in her belief of revenge. No amount of death and suffering dissuades her. Not even the loss of friends, her relationship, and a cottagecore happy ending are enough to stop her. She can't move on until she kills Abby or dies trying. It gives you the possibility of the character arc you want for Ellie on multiple occasions, and time again she refuses that path. The result is a story whose motivations I didn't agree with from the jump. I considered the ending of the first game an atrocity that Joel committed, and it made sense that he would die for that. Retributive justice isn't something I really find just, and most revenge stories clearly don't either. I also thought that if Ellie did survive this journey, it would cause her to lose more, and that it might result in a series of escalating conflict. And maybe my immediate disagreement with the revenge mission wasn't the general consensus, since I didn't expect such an uproar over Joel dying. But it seems pretty evident that the game is aware the player will not approve of Ellie's actions at some point. And its presentation deliberately attempts to make the player feel party to something filthy. In some aspects, it's a bit gimmicky, like how every NPC has a name and their companions will call it when they see them dead. Or the fact that people make these extreme horror movie cries when they die. But in other ways, it's striking. The melee animations are brutal. The sound design of slashing and stomps made me pause the first time I heard them. The silent kills cause the camera to punch in on the victim's face as well as the player character, making these situations tense as your third-person periphery is eliminated, as well as providing a reminder of this game's fixation on violence. In the story, they suitably prepare and pay off the central idea of Ellie's intergenerational trauma. She doesn't go down a dark path for no reason. And as much as the game says what she's doing is bad, her memories of Joel and the image of him being beaten to death as she's held down in front of him understandably haunt her. On a more monkey brain analysis of moment-to-moment gameplay, It's not super revolutionary to the first. There's a bit more Uncharted thrown in with light platforming and some crate and rope based puzzles, but I always felt a bit like the Uncharted series was a training ground for Naughty Dog to produce their first great shooter in The Last of Us, and I feel the same about the sequel, because it's all added atop a superior story and stealth base. It feels a lot more maneuverable than playing as Joel was, but it doesn't throw the whole thing out of balance. I also really like how different controlling the two protagonists feels. Ellie feels quicker and has more equipment that allows her to kill undetected. She can craft arrows, mines, smoke bombs, and her knife can always be used instead of making shivs. In-game, it makes sense that since she's clearly not as powerful as a lot of people, being a lanky 18-year-old and all, she relies on being resourceful and stealthy. On the other hand, I felt a little more prone to just go loud and run off before people swarm me as Abby, since she lacks most of those silent weapons and traps. Abby felt harder because of that, but the fact that she feels so powerful makes it a lot more fun to actually just melee or something. There was a certain satisfaction I got from just stomping the shit out of the common infected that made up for the fact I would just give up on stealth a lot. I'm really not the type of person who cares much about movie games being movie, but it can be a little excessive here. The unskippable flashbacks mar the replay experience, and the sheer amount of them doesn't feel entirely necessary. But I think the game aspects of the game are pretty fun. It makes the monkey piloting my brain go.
I go hard in the motherfucking paint.
One thing that really irks me though is that violence works too well for Ellie. I thought that this game, doing all this extra shit to be like, would maybe allow you to go without killing sometimes, but it's impossible to do a no-kill run, and even if you could, it doesn't affect the game in any way. As far as the storyline is concerned, Ellie still killed a bunch of people to get here. I was also hoping the game was going to show how ineffective torture actually is, which, by the way, is true, but, like, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you waterboard someone long enough, they'll admit to whatever you're accusing them of.
His vitals are spiking. He can't take much more. We're just getting started.
Or the victim could, I don't know, lie. A lot of Ellie's run-ins with the WLF are dead ends, and the encounter with Nora, who swallows spores before Ellie finally corners her, seemed to be hinting at the fact that Ellie really had no leverage once the certainty of death was present. So I kind of expected Nora to just die, and Ellie to not have gotten anything, but instead they resort to torture being a device to move the plot forward. I will say though that I'm really fucking glad this is the one time they didn't make you sit through something to get their point across about it, because this game wants so bad for you to hear that violence and vengeance are bad, and they will make you feel grossed out by it firsthand. Again, I think despite the gimmicks, that's a unique and effective framework for a video game. They did indeed make me feel things. However, the story is at its worst when applying this cynicism beyond the core cast of characters. In an event to have an unforgiving world, they craft one where they make pretty shallow statements about humanity. Of the multiple societies you interact with, only Jackson is competent. We don't ever see violence break out within its walls, everyone has housing, children play in the street, and whatever petty drama that occurs gets handled. They're a civil society that gives you the impression that humanity has rebuilt despite the fungus. This was really cool to see, and sets up the kind of world that Ellie had the chance to settle into rather than being Jokerfied. But afterward, we don't see any other factions that are at all on par with them. We already know the oppressive and fascist government organization Fedra. The WLF is similarly hyper-militarized and controlling, described in some of the supplementary notes as a different regime in name only, and everything we get about their leader makes him look like a psychopath. The Seraphites, who they're locked into a war over territory with, are similarly conservative religious fanatics. Our best window into their culture is through the characters Yara and Lev, who had no choice but to abandon the Seraphites because they don't allow transgender people to exist. Both of these groups have already demonized one another, and their war looks to us as something so foolish and maddening that it's hard to see the value of either society. And I just think that it would have been so much more impactful if we got to see reasons why one might have a sensible ideology or a source of conflict that gives us the thought that they might be salvageable. Instead, it wants us to see both sides as futile, and their war is really easy to condemn because they're waging it over petty tensions that escalated, but whose origins have long taken a backseat to just fighting for territory. The WLF apparently started the conflict when some Seraphite teenagers attacked some of their members. The WLF responded by gunning them down, breaking their established treaty. The Seraphites retaliated, and things built up from there. It's merely an even bigger cycle of violence, like the one Ellie, Joel, and Abby are locked in. But while theirs is given so much context and history, and there's a clear right and wrong spectrum in character actions, the war is just dumb. Like, it's a centrist stream. Both sides are self-righteous and conservative. Seraphites are like militarized Amish, and WLF are some Blue Lives Matter ass bastards. And this is where I should mention that according to Israeli-born co-director and co-writer Neil Druckmann, the conflict was intended to mirror that of Israel and Palestine. And if you didn't pick up on that, I'm not really surprised because I think it does a piss poor job of representing it. If you'd like to read up on the allegorical signifiers in the game, or Druckmann's thoughts about that story idea yourself, I'll link this article below, but I'll just read this excerpt. The game's themes of revenge can be traced back to the 2000 killing of 2 Israeli soldiers by a mob in Ramallah. Some of the gruesome details of the incident were captured on video, which Druckmann viewed. In his interview, he recounted the anger and desire for vengeance he felt when he saw the video, and how he later reconsidered and regretted those impulses, saying they made him feel gross and guilty, but it gave him the kernel of a story. I landed on this emotional idea of, can we, over the course of the game, make you feel this intense hate that is universal in the same way that unconditional love is universal. The Israel-Palestine conflict is frequently portrayed in this overly simplified manner, where they're on equal footing and locked in an endless war when they should just stop fighting. But I'll just say that Israel, which has taken so much land from Palestine over the years, has the military backing of the United States, and has done such things as withholding vaccines from Palestinian citizens, is not sufficiently represented by the WLF. Nor is Palestine equivalent to crazed religious fundamentalists who commit violence in the name of a martyr. These are common stereotypes about Palestinians that ultimately gives the game the same political messaging as You Don't Mess with the Zohan, starring fucking Adam Sandler. A perspective of the conflict that appears to deservedly criticize both sides, but obfuscates the context. You could make the argument that Last of Us 2 is harder on the WLF, as they have the upper hand, and we see their fascist ideology conclude that complete annihilation is the only way to peace, but it still uses the perspective that these sides are both shit, and that their war is the result of a bad turn of events that nobody stopped to make amends for rather than exacerbate. The last time we see them, our characters from each group choose to escape it entirely as it all goes up in flames, with barrages of enemies from both sides making it so that you have to kill them all indiscriminately. This is also the biggest way to demonstrate that while the personal conflict is pretty deep, the game isn't that deep. What Druckmann wanted to communicate from personal experience was a strong building block for this game, and I think that as a piece of art, it developed into something a lot more than that. Of course, being such a highly collaborative medium with such a lengthy story, it had to. And I thank God that it did, because the dissonance between Druckmann's idea of feeling violently nationalistic and then later reckoning with the guilt of that feeling and what I felt playing the game is terrifying. The game did not make me hate somebody so much I wanted them dead. Instead, I saw Ellie as troubled and suffering, chasing further misery while trying her hardest to pretend that she doesn't know deep down how stupid this decision is.
He can take care of himself.
Jesus Christ.
The best way to help Tommy is to go after Abby.
Never did I find her mission reasonable, and never did I think the WLF and Seraphites were a poignant commentary on global politics. What this series excels in is personal character-driven narratives. And these attempts to go big brain just fall flat. There's really not much to talk about with the last faction to appear at the end of the game, the Rattlers, because they're even more psychotic militaristic assholes who keep slaves and dress like Dog the Bounty Hunter. For the most part, I do really like the time I get with the supporting characters, but you can bet on losing almost every likable one, especially if they're more optimistic like Jesse or Yara. This world has no place for them. Likewise, Tommy starts off like a cool uncle and becomes sad and pathetic. But in contrast to Ellie's decision to leave her sweet, charming family unit with Dina and JJ, the new bond of Abby and Lev is an endearing mom and son pairing. I lament that the trans character has such a tragic transition story that his mom literally tries to kill him, but at least Lev is a fleshed out human being, and I really do love him. Also, tangent, but Manny is a 90s Latin lover stereotype. I hate the writing trope of the Latinx character who forces Spanglish into his conversations with the white protagonists.
On it.
Get me something con picante.
You generally code switch with people who share that code, and it'd be weird as hell if my white homie just started spitting pendejo back to me.
You're on, cabron.
Very big token ethnic bestie vibes. Anyway, the best world history thing they do is revisit the Fireflies as a bygone faction. In the first game, Ellie looked up to the Fireflies. She kind of considered herself one, unofficially. Now, because of Joel, she's party to their death. The remaining members among the WLF seem disillusioned with their involvement in it. In a flashback, Ellie sees grim notes about the end of the Fireflies, people whose hope died with the prospect of a vaccine. Owen expresses guilt over the acts of violence committed as a Firefly, now so far from that time that it seems pointless. But the game barrels forward. I most of the time appreciate the snappy dialogue of Naughty Dog games, the really solid characterization that they lay out without being too explicit about wants and needs. But I think at some point, it's okay to have that conversation. Like, what the fuck did Ellie go running around Seattle for if she's not going to at least ask, why did you do it, to the people involved? I know she knows that they're taking revenge on Joel, but is it so cut and dry when you have your surrogate father's killers before you? Doesn't she want to hear more about why they specifically think they had the right to carry out this violence 4 years later? Why they subjected Ellie to that violence? If they knew that Joel was part of a community now, that Ellie wished to God that he hadn't done what he did, but that now there's nothing she can do about it? They wait until a good bit into the game to confirm to the player that Ellie already knows what happened at the Firefly base. Fallout of that revelation is shown to be something she struggled with for her remaining years with Joel.
I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
Really emphasizing the crazy feelings that stew in her brain when he dies, so soon after she had just decided to try and forgive him and accept what's already lost. And I still find a lot of great nuggets about this hard fact that after tragedy, sometimes there is simply nothing we can do. Nothing will give us true closure. One of my favorite story elements toward this is that even though Ellie is immune, they can't make a vaccine. Maybe there are other immune people out there, but with no known way to transfer that immunity, it's pretty meaningless. Part of Ellie's death wish is fueled by the fact that life, especially in their fucked up world, could have had meaning had she been able to sacrifice herself for some greater good.
My life would have fucking mattered. But you took that from me.
But opportunities like that don't present themselves in the real world. And Ellie is just a normal person with a better ability to survive infected zones. No matter how far she goes into her vengeance quest, it's not going to spark any meaning. There are plenty of revenge stories with a purposeful anticlimax, ones where the protagonist realizes this doesn't provide any fulfillment or justice and they back out. But Ellie goes so far, and in a pleasant surprise, when you play as Abby, our former antagonist gets the fucking storyline we wanted for Ellie.
What do you think they're up to? I don't know. The goal was always to restore society. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to go about it.
Abby, who was so beholden to violence and revenge, who says that cop shit about how the Seraphite teenagers got themselves killed.
Manny, they're kids. It's not their fault. Not our fault either. Those deaths are on them.
Walks away from it all and forms a new kind of family with Lev. Who knows where they paddle off to at the end, but there's hope for them beyond that fog. Ellie has nothing. And as obvious a cautionary tale as Tommy ends up being, he literally loses an eye trying to get even, she's now in the same boat. To this commitment to tragedy, I have to admire the game. But while I concede that Abby's narrative gave me the arc I wanted, I also have to ask if there was a way to weave Ellie's downfall without making me hate her entire journey.
Free Palestine, free TK,